Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Buff Nagel the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to Buff Nagel, the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I am Rafe, and today is another Big Brain Smart Head guest day. It's going to be a great day for you, the world's greatest listeners, who have made us a global top 10% podcast. Remember, you can always reach us at buffnagel at buffnagel.com. Remember to share the love, share the buff, give us a 5-star review, hit subscribe or like or the smiley star, whatever it is on your podcast player that makes me know that your life is better because of us. That would be great for you to do. Tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. Somewhere buried in the show notes, you will find a link to buy me a coffee. We have a Big Brain Smart Head guest with us this week. He is an author, a speaker, the president and CEO of CareNet. He's an alumnus of Princeton University with an MBA from Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in pastoral counseling from Liberty University. He has held positions at IBM, PepsiCo, Goldman Sachs, Princeton University, and the National Fatherhood Institute. Most importantly, he is a husband. He's a father. He's a father-in-law, and one of my favorites, a grandfather. Please welcome Big Brain Smart Head, Roland Warren. Roland, how are you this morning?
I'm well.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. Hey, Let's just dive in here. Let's talk about culture. I had an episode about 3 weeks ago lamenting some of the issues around our culture. We are in a great technological age, but we are at a point of decadence of material things. We have an abundance of them, but it doesn't seem to be making us any happier. We are fractured. We have bad food, bad dress, bad fashion. We have empty lives, noisy music, disturbing art, insulting architecture, poor literature, poor movies, bad education. Everything seems terrible except truth, goodness, and beauty. Where do we start? How do we right the ship, turn things around, get going in the right direction? Please tell us where to go.
Well, that's a pretty tall order. I'm not sure if I got all the way.
Yeah, we got half an hour. Let's see what you got.
Oh, go, Frank. Oh, I thought I had less than that. So there you go. Yeah, I certainly, the work that I've done over the years since I left the corporate world, I was really inspired by, what I was seeing happen in the broader culture. My sort of lane, so to speak, has been around the family, which is a foundational unit of any culture, and a specific aspect of that being, the absence of involved, responsible, and committed fathers. And so, as a kid who grew up in a father-absent home with a single mother for much of my young life, and seeing the impact of that on me, on my mother, and the broader community. I'm African American, so this is certainly a big part of that experience. That's foundational for me. So as the family goes, so goes the culture. So if you see the family structure start to disintegrate, or you start people having questions about what a family is, or what a man is, or what a woman is, or any of those kinds of things, and you start pulling away those foundational bricks, if you will, in the culture, it doesn't take long for you to see the decline. It kind of reminds me of the experience I had some years ago. We were, my wife and I were in the Czech Republic, and we were visiting some of these old cathedrals and things of that nature. And if you've ever been over there, some of the beautiful architecture. We went up. I went all the way up to the top, and my wife didn't want to go up. She's got kind of a height fear thing. I went all the way up to the top, and then I looked down on her, and she looked really, really small, right? And sometimes I use this illustration that if I told my wife, hey, listen, that brick over there in the corner of the foundation of this, just pull that thing out, and then pull some more of them out, right? And when she would hold up one of those bricks, it'd be like teeny weeny, very small, right? Because of where I am. But the reality is that that little bitty thing, which seems very little, is actually foundational. It's actually holding the whole structure together. So if you think about the broad sense of culture, which is sort of a building blocks of culture, right? You
Hmm.
start pulling out like these things that people say, maybe we don't really need that brick, like a father involved, responsible, and committed in a family, the sanctity of marriage and family, and God's design for that. Then you're surprised that you start to see that emphasis, that structure, start to sway and start to lose its stability. And then when there's storms, if you will, that come into
Hmm.
culture, if you will, then all of a sudden you're going, my gosh, this place is crumbling. How could that be? We just pulled out this real teeny weeny little stone. How can that be? But because you've lost perspective, if you will,
Right.
of how important those foundational cornerstones are. And in my world, a key one of those is God's design for family, and the role of fathers and mothers, and the role that they play, God's call to discipleship from a ministry perspective. And
Hmm.
so that kind of, it's called like sort of a double helix of faith and family
Right.
coming together. And you start to unravel those things, and then you're surprised that the whole structure begins to unravel. And I think that's what we've seen in a lot of ways. So I'm kind of focused very much on those foundational issues. You build strong families, guess what? You'll get strong cultures. You don't build strong families, guess what? You get weak cultures. You build, moral families, okay, you get moral cultures. But if you don't build moral families and expect moral cultures, you're kind of like that person way up high looking down, and then being surprised when you see the structure sway.
You mentioned there were things were just flashing into my head as you're talking about that. We went to Florence a couple years ago and went to the top of Duomo there, and you climb up in, it's two shells of dome. That's what Brunelleschi made there in Florence, and you get to walk in between those two shells up on this magic little super scary staircase all the way to the observation deck on the top. And I kept thinking about how is this being held up? And you're exactly right. It's the thing in the foundation, the bricks at the bottom. What could go wrong if we pulled that out? And when you mentioned that, I thought of Chesterton's fence, the idea of, before you dig up a fence, you got to figure out why it's there in the first place. So,
Right.
And I think there's a lot of general agreement about what you said. I'm sure there are some people that say, no. The reason you can pull that brick out and not have a problem is because this other thing we're going to put in place and it's going to be all better. But how do we? Okay, people have pulled out bricks, right? How do we get the bricks? How do we get bricks back in? How do we restore that? What do we do? How do we do that with? I guess I want to ask how to do it on a grand level, but I don't even think that's the right question. I think it has to be done on a local, on a ground level. It has to be done. What do we do? How do we breed, like you said, good men to build good families, to build a good culture?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I always start with why. And so often, people deal with what and the how. I call it the second question, if you will. Excuse me. So often, people will look at a problem in culture or in a family and say, "What can we do to fix this problem, or how can we fix it?" But kind of going back to what you were saying about Chesterton, actually, that's the second question. The first question you should be asking is, why is there a problem here? Why are
Mm-hmm.
you seeing this breakdown of the family? Why are you seeing drug abuse? Why are you seeing, dysfunction? Why are you seeing sexual abuse? Why are you seeing low academic performance? Why are you seeing teen pregnancy or out of wedlock pregnancy? Why are you seeing a high rate of abortion? Like, why are we seeing all those things? And that's the first thing you have to start to ask, right? Is that the why question? And too often people don't want to focus there, because when you focus on the why question, then you get to some uncomfortable places. I mean, another illustration, you see a guy on the street, he's homeless, and he asks you for some change. And you say, well,
Right.
okay, throw him some change, and you just keep moving. Okay, easy thing to do. But if you stop and say, why are you on this corner? Why are you homeless to begin with? That's going to require a lot more out of you, and then you start to get into oughts and ought nots, like,
Right.
moral statements and those kinds of things. And there's a reluctance to do that. So to me, you got to start by asking the why. To a lot of these issues. And I work at CareNet. We're a Christian ministry is focused on the life issue, and focused on helping women and men faced with pregnancy decisions at risk for abortion, choose life for
Mm-hmm.
their families, and abundant life for their family, a life for their unborn child, and abundant life for their family. And you look at that and you go like, okay, wait a minute. So we have a culture now that has so dehumanized the least of these in the womb, then you could see why when folks get outside of the womb, like we start to dehumanize there. I mean, you can measure a culture by how it treats its most vulnerable, how it
Sure.
treats its
Yep.
least of these. And the least of these is a child in the womb. In fact, that's the most vulnerable place that any of us have ever been. That's a shared vulnerability that we all have. None of us
Right.
have been more vulnerable than when we were in our mother's wombs. And so when you start to kind of disregard that,
Right.
then then all the other things are very easy to do. End of life, or elderly people, or people that have some kind of disability or something. It's very easy to disregard those kinds of people and not have a perspective there of kind of helping those folks. When the least of these you kind of casually throw away. And so again, that's a why question. So why do we have this sort of disregard? You know,
Mhm.
the reason why. Okay, and then you say, well, why are women more at risk for having abortions? Well, 87% of the ones that have abortions are unmarried. Oh, so you mean that foundational thing of the marriage is
Right.
key to the why we have the abortion rate. Oh, okay, and why are they involved in unplanned pregnancy? Oh, because we know that kids who grow up in father absent homes are more likely to be sexually active. Oh, okay, like that kind of thing. You have to keep folding back to the why. And when I do, I end up with God's design for family. And now I'm hopeful with that
Right.
because that's an easier thing to change than quote the structural or systemic issues that people like to focus on, right? They want to talk about all the systemic issues. That's an easier thing to do because I can say to myself, hey, I'm going to be a man of integrity who loves my wife and loves my kids and love my grandkids and is faithful to her. Like I can make that personal decision, and I can be inspired to make that personal decision. And then therefore I can try to inspire other folks to make that personal decision. And before you know it, you've got a household that's making that decision. Then guess what? Now you got a neighborhood that's making that decision. And the next one, now you got a town, then you got a city, then you got a state, and then you got a country, and then you got a world that's making that decision. And it all starts with this foundational perspective. And that when, for me as a Christian, when I look at the biblical narrative, that's why there's such a focus on family as the transformative institution for culture, both faith and family, those two things together, God's design for family, and then which is linked to God's call to discipleship from a Christian perspective.
Now you've talked in the past, and I would, if you would bring this up, that'd be great. You've talked in the past about what you've called God's design for the family,
Yeah.
and you've mentioned in the first couple chapters of Luke the biblical narrative there of Mary's fiat, Mary's yes to God's plan, and
Yep.
His plan for Joseph, and how Joseph models. Well, he models how a man functions, and then therefore how the whole family functions.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's why, again, the biblical narrative is so amazing because, in the work that I do, the most celebrated unplanned pregnancy in human existence is the birth of Christ.
Right.
You have Mary and her humanity facing an unplanned pregnancy, hope and dreams for her life did not include a child at this time and in this way. And, obviously she has all this uncertainty of what she doesn't know, but she focuses on the certainty of what she does know, which is that she has in the humanity, the least of these in her womb. And so what does she do? She sacrifices for that. So it's not a life worth sacrificing, but a life worth sacrificing for, right? So you see that's very instructive. Now, here you got the mother and then you got the child. But what does God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy isn't a crisis pregnancy? He sends an angel to Joseph and not
Right.
calling him to be a baby daddy or something like that.
Right.
Calling him to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing
Be not
inside.
afraid to take her as your wife.
Exactly. In other
Right.
words, the vulnerability there, he steps into that vulnerability. And that's really what manhood's about, right? It's about being willing to protect the vulnerable, right? So he steps into that and they build what? A family that to live and love like the child that's growing inside of her. So to me, that's instructive. Why? Because, if you're a Christian, you know that God had a plan to bring the Savior into the world. But he didn't necessarily have to bring Jesus into the world via, he could have done it via a single mother. It could have been written in scripture that way, right? But he didn't do that because that would accomplish his purpose without violating a principle, his design for family. So even with the birth of Christ, you see that foundational piece that we've been talking about already, a family. father and mother united in marriage, loving each other, loving their child, and loving God. I think that's instructional for us. Because clearly, if there was anyone who was equipped to walk the earth with a single mother, it was Jesus. Right.
Right.
But yet God in his plan and his design to put a fine point on the centrality and the importance of family structure, right, for human flourishing, he brings Jesus into the world through that structure, the same structure that started in the garden with Adam and Eve, where marriage is affirmed, if you will. So to me, it's all there. Like that's in the first chapter, the first book of the New Testament, God's design for family. And from my perspective, if you want to know what the way forward is, you have to look at that as a foundational perspective, because that's then where faith is then communicated around the dinner table, if you will, which then transforms that home, which then transforms that neighborhood, and onward and onward and onward. So you see that laid out there. And frankly, that's what we know when we look in culture. You know, when you build strong families, guess what? You have human flourishing, even for folks who are not followers of Christ. There's certain kind of laws of human nature, if you will, that follow the laws of nature. And when you violate the laws of human nature, then you also get, chaos in the same way if you violate the laws of nature, if you will.
Yeah. I've lately, it's amazing what you can continue to learn. The biggest thing I've learned as I've aged is how stupid I was when I was younger. And what has struck me over the last several years is the value in the concept of meeting people where they are. Yeah. And there are a lot of people. I mean, I'll bet it's the majority of the people that either struggle with a faith, just a general faith concept, or have no understanding at all. I've met a number of people that have no understanding of any of the things that we've just talked about. Right. And so in that, so my question is, how do we reach them where they are? Right. So it's easy for you and I to talk about, well, you're formed in image and likeness of God. You have a purpose. You have all these things. When a young lady is faced with a pregnancy that she feels she can't afford in whatever regard, either financial or life direction or societal pressure, how do you reach that woman? I think I have ideas on that as I'm asking the question. I'm forming ideas, but like, how do you get there? Because it's easy. It's easy it's easy. Faith, Christianity is not the easy one to follow. If you want an easy one, don't pick Christianity. All right. But it gives you a playbook. Okay. How do you instill or provide a playbook to those who aren't there yet?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I kind of walk through a lot of this in the book that I wrote called The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life, which folks can get on Amazon. I walk through some of this in great detail, but I think with everything, it really starts with love. I mean, wow, yes. Surprise, surprise, right? What does love have to do with it? Everything. Everything. And that's actually the common ground, because we actually all want to be loved. I mean, the reality is that, we don't want to be tolerated. So that's why I always think about people talk about tolerance, and no one wants to be tolerated. Imagine you meet a new neighbor, they come to your house, right? And you say to them, listen, just want to know why you're in the neighborhood, I'm going to tolerate you. Right? Like, or you take 1 Corinthians 13, right? That's the love chapter. People know love is patient, love is kind, right? And you replace the word love with tolerance. Or you tell your wife when you propose, listen, I want you to know that I'm going to tolerate you, and I'm going to tolerate any children that we bring into the world. I mean, right? We're longing for love is what we're longing for. Now, you don't get love in the truest sense without God. And that's, so to me, the bridge is like the desire for love, which I think we all are created with a desire for that. And then that's the bridge to bring you back to sort of this biblical understanding. And where do you see that? Well, Luke 10:27. Right? You have this passage where a lawyer comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to inherit the kingdom of God, if you will? And then Jesus says, well, what's the book say? It says, love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, this ethic about these three loves, love of God, love of neighbor, right? And love of self. It's like a trinity that links together. And so when you're talking to someone who's facing a difficult situation, what they've basically done is they've taken whatever it may be, particularly in the life issue, they've taken something that is a covenant relationship, which is what love is, and turned it into a consumer relationship.
Right.
And then when you take things that are intrinsically covenant and turn them into consumer, it's very easy to do bad things to them. So you can kill a bunch of Jews because you view them as in a consumer mindset as opposed to a covenant mindset. And that's what Jesus is doing there. So there's a desire for love, and that's where you start. And that's called the great commandment, right? To love God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And how you get that person to kind of get to that place where they see that is that, particularly if you're having a conversation around faith, you say, well, loving your neighbor, that word neighbor means near one or near fellow in the Greek. And the word for love that's there is the highest form of love, which we all want, which is agape love. Like this means it's unconditional love. So that you're supposed to unconditionally love your neighbor. This is what Jesus said to the lawyer.
Right.
Now, when you're thinking about that in the context of a woman facing a pregnancy decision, the child growing inside of her is her neighbor.
Yes.
Because we talk about the Greek word for neighbor means near one or near fellow. In other words, nearness is defined two ways: relationship, right, and proximity.
Yep. Right.
So next of kin, next to you in the most intimate way. I mean, that's a transformation that happens, and there's a desire for that. Now, how do you help someone see that? Well, they're your neighbor.
Right.
So you're trying to help a neighbor love a neighbor to love a neighbor, right? So then that means that you've got to step into that gap, right, and minister to that person in that way. So what we find with so many women facing pregnancy decisions, it's all about missing physical, emotional, spiritual, or social support, right? So what's the love of Christ call us to do, right? Not just to kind of preach at them around the value of life, but to show them the value of love and the impact of love. So when you love a neighbor, right, then they're inspired to love others. And that's why the family is important. A loving family, it demonstrates to your kids what love is. And guess what? Then they're inspired to go out and do what? Play it forward and to love others. So to me, the kind of the beginning of this, in terms of recapturing this, is finding the common ground. Everyone wants love, but they haven't defined love properly. The culture has basically taken love and defined it as tolerance because they don't want God. So tolerance is basically love minus God, which frankly,
that's not going to get you where you need to go. Right.
Of course not. Because it's a secular version of love. Because the thing about love is that it's patient, it's kind, it's all these things, but tolerance never is. In fact, you think about tolerance, the word tolerance is basically like, think about metal or steel. It tells you when something will break. Right? Love never fails, right? Because there's forgiveness and restoration and all of that. So when you're walking into a situation where someone is facing one of these kinds of situations, when you come in with the ethic of love and you say, hey, no matter what you've done or where you've been or how you got here, I'm going to step into that situation and love you, as a neighbor because I love God, right? And I'm going to inspire you to love God, love your neighbor, frankly, and to love yourself by not killing this child growing inside of you, which creates an antipathy between you and an almighty God. As you step into that to provide the physical, emotional, spiritual, and social support, guess what? You're more likely to have that person make that decision. And that's exactly what we see in terms of the work that we do. And that's what I kind of walk through in terms of the difference between being pro-life, right, which is more of a political narrative,
right,
and being pro-abundant life, which is a biblical narrative that's built off of the ethic of love and built off the great commandment.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to mention is you've talked about abundance a couple of times, and you mentioned when the angel Gabriel goes to Joseph, his words are, "Do not be afraid to take her as your wife." And so what I hear a lot, you are constantly reaffirming to these women you meet that. That you are loved, that there is support for you. The things that you long for are here. The culture on the other side, the death culture, is one based on fear. It is one constantly based on fear. And if you go back through the scriptures, every time, it's like here we go again, right? Every time God talks to man, typically through the angel, through the messenger, the angel. The first words, don't be afraid.
Yes.
Don't be afraid. And in fact, JP2 wrote about that a lot. That was the title that was his catchphrase was don't be afraid. So eliminate the fear and live an abundant life. Okay. And I think I want to ask you, like, how does that manifest? Because it's more than just, I have to believe that there are women out there that say, okay, I chose the life thing. Well, now what do I do? Now I'm in more debt. Now I have heavy burdens. I have, like, what is abundance? Because we have abundance right now. We have tons of, we have so much material abundance. We have decadence, but it's not producing joy. It's not producing, we're not flourishing with that. Yep. And I love the term of abundance, because Christ says, I came to give you life in abundance.
Yes.
So what does that look like then 3, 5, 20, 50 years down the line for that woman?
Yeah, no, it's great. And you captured it perfectly, because it's John 10:10, where Christ said, I came that you might have life and then have that life abundantly. And so that Greek word for life there, he means two things: physical life, which is the word bios, B-I-O-S, which is where we get the word biology, physical life. But then he's also talking about Zoe, which is a unique type of spiritual life that only comes from a relationship with God. So in other words, he's saying, I came to link your bios to my Zoe, that you might be heartbeats that are heaven bound. And so the practical way that kind of heavenly perspective brings itself to earth, again, like a broken record, God's designed for family, right? That's what you see in the narrative there. So a key part of helping that woman get the support that she needs is that you can't define this issue as just about a woman and a baby. You have to define it as a family. So we need to be pursuing the proverbial Joseph, right, who got the woman pregnant, with the same intensity as we are trying to pursue her and assist her. Right. So that's a big part of CareNet's ministry model. We are trying to build strong families, right? Because that's the most durable support that she will have in terms of physical, emotional, spiritual, and social support. Now, I don't just say that kind of theoretically. I say that practically and experientially. Why? Because when I was an undergrad at Princeton, in my junior year, I got my sophomore girlfriend pregnant. And, when she went to Student Health Services to get the pregnancy test, the nurse comes out, gives a test, says it's positive, and without taking an extra gulp of air, says, now, of course, you're going to have an abortion. Well, she says, I don't want to have an abortion. I want to get married. I want to have a family, and this and the other. And the nurse says, my gosh, how are you going to graduate from Princeton with a baby? And what do you want to do when you graduate?
Watch me.
Right. Well, what do you want to do when you graduate? I want to become a doctor. My gosh, become a doctor with a baby, graduate with a baby, right? Well, she comes back to the dorm room, and I guess we had the conversation. I essentially said to her in my kind of 20-year-old way, well, we're going to move forward. We're going to get married. I'll be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you. And that's what we did. We got married. She was 20. I was 19. I was 20. She was 19. Got married, had our first child. The nurse was right about one thing. She didn't have one baby at Princeton. She had two. So both of her sons were there. She carried our second son in her graduation. She went on to become a doctor and to be practicing medicine nearly 30 years. Now, what was the key there? Well, the key there was kind of what I'm talking about. Like, God called me to tap into my inner Joseph, to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her, as she was called to tap into her inner Mary, to not look at our son growing inside of her as a life worth sacrificing, but a life worth sacrificing for. See, so if you're going to talk about this issue, you have to talk about it holistically. And again, 87% of the women who have abortions are unmarried. So you're actually not going to solve the issue without the two sanctities that you see in the birth of Christ: the sanctity of marriage and family, where Joseph's told, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. And then he told him who Jesus was, which is the sanctity of life. So those two things are linked together. Now, if there's a situation where a guy says, is not going to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her, well, that is specifically the role of the local church. That's why you have to frame this issue through the lens of discipleship. In other words, that ethic that you see in the Great Commandment, you have to link that to what you see in the Great Commission, which is making disciples. And making disciples is about an ethic of love, loving your neighbor. So you were supposed to live out the Great Commandment to fulfill the Great Commission. If you're looking at the life issue through that lens, then guess what? That woman who's facing that unplanned pregnancy and does not have a Joseph who's going to step into the gap, that's the role of the local church. James 1:27 talks about religion that God our Father finds us pure and faultless, to care for the orphans and widows in their distress. When that was written, what was an orphan? The child of a father. And what was a widow? It was typically a mother without a husband. And the measure of righteousness is the ability to step into that gap. So if you're seeking righteousness in God's time, we have a very specific call to orphans and widows, which in our context is single mothers and their children. So when you take this issue and you make it primarily political as opposed to primarily ministry, That's why a woman can feel abandoned. Because you're
Right.
thinking, well, my response to her unplanned pregnancy is to make sure she can't have an abortion, to vote for that candidate, right?
Right. Right.
My response is to look at it the way that, Mary's unplanned pregnancy could be viewed. Could it be that God was using her unplanned pregnancy to an end, that she might become a disciple of Jesus Christ? And the answer is yes, because that's exactly what happened. It's why you and I, anyone who's listening would be a follower of Jesus Christ. It came from an unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective and God's response to that. When people of the book, right, start to view this issue primarily through that lens, there's an abundance of love that comes in. And the other thing you do, you start to restore the family structure. Why do I say that? When I was a kid growing up, I didn't have a dad in the home, but I went to church. My mother sent me to church. And I remember seeing Pastor Culp and other men in the church who were being husbands and fathers. So even though I wasn't growing up in that environment, that vision was cast for me so that when I got my girlfriend pregnant, right, which was mistake one, I didn't make mistake two of being a baby dad with a check, because I had seen modeled for me outside of the home God's design for family. And it was aspirational for me. So in one generation, we broke that cycle. We had both of our sons. Both of our sons are now married, and we now have grandchildren. I mean, it's human flourishing in terms of God, in terms of God's design.
And it's life in abundance.
And that's the abundance life. It's two things, that pillars that hold up what I call a pro-abundant life roof: God's design for family and God's call to discipleship. The role of the family is to teach children how to live out the great commandment, which is to love neighbor, right? And the role of the church family is to fulfill the Great Commission. And you link those two things together, and those are the pillars that are there. And again, I go through this in great detail in my book, and there's some great graphics that kind of help you see what I'm talking about in a visual sense.
No, that's wonderful. I keep thinking of the young men, okay, and because I've seen so many. As one time I was a young man, and I see so many young men in the current culture. There's, first of all, there's a zillion people out there, so it's easy to see anybody of any stripe that you want to find. You can find them out there. But I wonder so much about absent fathers and about the young men and how many of them abandon.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And how do you, like you said, you seek to, I guess, provide the picture of the Joseph to them. How often are you met? Like how well does that go? I mean, how because that's key, right? That is, you can't have a family without mother, father, and child, right? You can't do that, and because I have to believe that that is a massive crisis in our culture, and I don't. How do you do that?
Well, again, for me, I get very practical. Look, I was that kid, right, who was growing up without a dad, and there were men who stepped into my life. I have a concept I call being a double duty dad. Okay. So you're a father and you're raising your kids, but then there's a kid who's growing up without a dad. Can you integrate that young man into some of the things that you're doing? If you see that your son or daughter has a friend that's hanging out with you, tends to hang out at the family and kind of wants to be there, and you do a back and you just kind of fold back. You're like, well, maybe their family structure, maybe their father's not there. They have this longing. I always tell people, kids have a hole in their soul in the shape of their dad, and right. if the father's unable or unwilling to fill that hole, it can leave a wound that's not easily healed. A lot of guys that are incarcerated today, they just try to work out this wounded soul that they have, and they went in a different direction than maybe the direction I went. To fill that perspective. So I think that, each one reaching one in that context and being intentional, not just to look out, but look down and around. There are kids within your neighborhood, in your family, in your church that need the mentoring presence of a loving father. You're not replacing their father, but you're showing them what fatherhood looks like, so that it can be aspirational, like it was for me. So again, I get very practical about these things, because you start to string that together. You get the community of men who are already stepping into that role, then stepping into the gap just by stretching a little bit to include another young man in that mix that is growing up without a dad, and you're modeling that and mentoring that into him. Then you start to break the cycle, so that even though he's not living in that reality, he can live out that reality because he had a model and a vision there. It's difficult to be what you don't see. And
Right.
so, and so that's the key. Now, the other challenge with so many of these guys facing pregnancy decisions, as I've talked to them, a lot of these guys are running from fatherhood because they didn't have fathers.
Right.
So they're terrified of the prospect of becoming a father and being the kind of father that they never had. In other words, so they just go and say to her, "Listen, it's your body, your choice. I don't want to deal with that because I don't have a model to show me what to do." So one of the key things that we do through our pregnancy center network, we've got 1,300 pregnancy centers across the country, is that we actually work with the guy who's part of this pregnancy decision through that ministry, and we have resources to help him develop skills as a father, to help her, help him, help them, basically, to help her in that role. And as she sees him stepping into that role, that gives her the confidence that she's not going to be on this parenting journey alone. But it's skills. Fatherhood, it's a skill that you can learn like shooting a jump shot, right?
Right.
You have to be intentional to do that. So that's a big part of our ministry platform, to help them step into that gap. And then, of course, try to have a conversation about marriage, to try to build a strong family there. Can you do that all the time? No, but you can do it a lot more often than people do, because we don't even try. We just going to send her out as a single mother with a child, when the reality is, if we can help that guy step into the gap by giving him the skills that he needs to be a good dad, we can actually build a stronger family, and therefore reduce the risk of abortion in the future, unplanned pregnancies, and all the other things, the intractable social ills that come from father absent homes, unfortunately.
Yeah. As you're saying this, I keep getting these. I have these people come to me and they say, well, you guys are always so judgmental, and I'm like, there are things that you pointed this out. You said you made a mistake, but you didn't make the second mistake. And to me, that is one of those. That's another one of those bricks. Okay, because we've all made mistakes. Okay, some of us have made bigger mistakes than others. We've all made mistakes, and some of us are just really lucky that we didn't make really bad mistakes. But the really bad mistakes come from doubling down on the first mistake, typically. Right. And I always look at this. I think it's better to have a culture that has, I guess I'm still trying to figure out a really clever cliche way to say this, because it's like, I think we need to have really strict rules, but we need to have abundant mercy.
Yeah.
All right. And it's much better to say, don't do these bad things, and then forgive when somebody slips up, than say there are no rules. All right. That just, it seems to me like that's a much better model. And you talk about fatherhood, and I always come back. Father's Day is coming up. All right. It's coming up here in mid-June. And the prodigal son story to me is the one. It's like, I always get choked. I get choked up just thinking about the prodigal son story, because I keep imagining the father in that story with a gigantic robe, just people listening can't see this, wrapping the child, the returning child, in the robe, and saying, you were dead and now you're back. And that's what you can get. That's the life in abundance that you can get. And to double down on that and make the next mistake and keep, hiding in the little hell you make for yourself and locking the door from the inside is not life in abundance. And you can't unscramble eggs, but God can make good out of everything. He can make good out of everything. Doesn't mean you should test him. Right. But I was when I was writing these little notes about who you are, based on the stuff I found on the internet, what struck me was this concept of husband, father, father-in-law, and grandfather. And the concept of who we are now, that was what we always used to say about us. I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a father, is our relationship to others defines who we are. That's everything. These other things that you have done, the writing, the speaking, the business kinds of things, those are exciting. But my guess, is you won't be lying on the deathbed saying, I wish I would have made one more sale or commissioned one more meeting or chaired one more session. What matters are the husband, father, father-in-law, grandfather things.
No, that's an excellent point. I've one of the illustrations I've used in my own mind, but I've said to others is, think about your funeral and think about who you're living for. Are you living for the folks that are in the sanctuary, or are you living for the folks that are at the gravesite? And you've noticed, you notice with a funeral, right? There's all the folks that are in the sanctuary, right? All these people.
Yeah.
And then the crowd gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner until you get to the gravesite.
Right.
A pretty small crowd. And then those who linger, even after that, even the smaller crowd. And it just amazes me, like, how many men in particular are living for the sanctuary and not living for the gravesite. And who's there at the gravesite? God's always there.
Right.
Are you living for that? Yeah. And then what are those other relationships that are there? Your spouse, your kids, your grandkids. I mean, it's a really small crowd. And it's kind of an upside down way of thinking about it, because the culture is trying to say, no, live for the sanctuary. That's the big thing. But at the end of the day, the folks who really care about you, love you, going to be there for you, are going to be the people that are going to be at the gravesite at the end. And my view is, you want to orient your life so that your priority is on that, which starts with God's there. When all them folk leave, God's still there. Right? Even if they put you in God's still there. So, okay, so we want to build that as foundation, because he's always the last one there, if you will. But then you start to build out from that. And I really think if you live that way, it really changes the dynamic of how you think about things, how you prioritize your work, how you prioritize your balance, your work and your family, the decisions that you make, and that kind of a thing. So when things start to get kind of out of balance in my own life, I kind of have this thing of going, wait a minute, don't forget the gravesite. Okay, so yeah, I got this project to do, but what about your granddaughter? You need to make that kind of thing when you make that perspective. So I hope that's helpful to folks. But you start thinking about things that way, I tell you, it really.
It's a long-term perspective, right? I mean, it's a long-term perspective, and I keep thinking, we have six grandkids out now, and sometimes it gets tough. It gets tough. The moms are dealing with 3 kids under the age of 5 kind of thing. And it's busy and it's hard, but I from this side can see what it feels like when they all come back from college and you get to and you all meet for pizza at that one place. Yeah. See, I got to stop getting choked up for these kinds of things, right? But those are the things, right? And if you're just seeing now, and you're just seeing, well, how am I have to deal with so and so talking bad about me or whatever. No. You have to look all the way to the end. And I always told our kids, it was it's a long, long game. You're halfway through the first quarter, and you made this mistake. You got a long way to go. There's a lot of game left here. You're not even at halftime. Just think toward the fourth quarter, and things will be a lot better. And we're too short-sighted, right? And those perspectives, the longer perspectives, really help out. Roland, I'm going to let you go. We're almost 45 minutes here. This has been wonderful. Thank you very much. Can you, let's see. So Roland Warren, you can see him. Where would they find you if they want to look you up?
Yeah, sure. I'm at CareNet. That's care-net.org. Okay. So you can learn more about the ministry that I'm a part of there. And then there's rolandcwarren.com, which is the website. And I've got 3 books out. The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life. Raising Sons of Promise, a guide for single mothers of boys, which I wrote based on my life experience. And then one for dads called Bad Dads of the Bible, 8 Mistakes Every Good Dad Can Avoid. So you can find those books on Amazon. So
that is wonderful. Well, happy Father's Day to you.
Yeah, same to you. Yeah, Grandfather's Day. Yeah.
Yes, that's because it is grandparenting for a reason, as they say.
That's right.
So thank you very much. And happy Father's Day to you, and have a great summer.
Thank you very much. Blessings to you as well.
All right. And the rest of you out there, remember, seek the good, live virtuously and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life.
It's going to be a great day.